So my predecessor as the swing scientist is well known to all. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay, I won't use this. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. I'll give a brief introduction, then I want to talk about my model for the ball-bat collision. There's going to be a little bit of physics here, not much, bear with me. And then what I want to do is get into talking about what any of this has to do with reality by comparing with StatCast data and see what we can learn about batters' tendencies based on this ball-bat collision model. And then sort of, I want to give you a brief overview at the end of where all this is headed, what's next to do, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I want to start off by showing you something that you've probably all seen before, I hope. What I'm doing is plotting, this is a color contour map of WOBA, okay, weighted on base average for contact. Exit velocity and launch angle, and you see well-defined locations on this plot. You see singles and doubles, so you're hitting with, you know, moderately high to high exit velocities at a launch angle sort of in the 10 to 15 degree range. If your goal in life is to just simply get on base, that'll get you there pretty much every single time. If your goal in life is to get extra base hits, and in particular home runs, you still want high exit velocity, but now you've got to get in a launch angle sort of like 25 to 35, or you could stretch it to 20 to 35 degrees, something like that. This area here, you know, basically are bloop singles, okay? Balls hit with a moderately high launch angle, but not such a great exit velocity. If you hit it too hard, then the outfield is going to catch it. So these are bloop singles. I'm assuming that no one's really trying to do that, okay? Now, there are other considerations which I'll get to later on in the talk regarding minimizing timing errors. And that also will inform a batter on appropriate swing plane and things like that. So I'll get to that later in the talk. Okay, so the question is, what's a batter to do? Batting success, whether you're trying to hit home runs or just simply get on base, depends on which region of the exit velocity launch angle space you're trying to populate. And the big question is, and this is the question that I want to address, is how does the batter adjust the swing in order to achieve the desired exit velocity launch angle range? And so the answer is physics, okay? We need physics to be able to relate the exit velocity, you know, the parameters of the batted ball, be it exit velocity, launch angle, spray angle, spin, whatever, to parameters of the swing, and in particular to parameters of the actual ball-bat collision. Now, I'm not a biomechanics guy. I don't know anything at all about how a batter mechanically swings the bat to get to a certain place. I'm only focusing on that very, very brief moment in time when the ball and bat are actually in contact with each other. Okay, so I'm going to refer to this picture a lot. So this is the two-dimensional version of my model. There is a three-dimensional version that is actually also very well developed, but I'm not going to get into that here. Most of the important conclusions I want to draw for the moment, you could see already just from the two-dimensional model. Okay, so here is the picture. We have the incoming ball moving at a pitch speed and descending at a descent angle. I'll just use the initials DA for descent angle just because it's easier. Here is the bat making contact with the ball. It's moving in the direction of this red arrow. It has a certain bat speed. And there is a certain attack angle, AA. So it's the angle that that direction of the bat is going with respect to the horizontal. The other important parameter is what I have in various articles I've written called the offset. It's the vertical distance between the center of the ball and the center of the bat at the moment of contact. Now, throughout this talk, I will sometimes refer to the offset, but I actually prefer to talk about this thing I call the centerline angle. and there's a direct one-to-one correspondence between the two. So the centerline angle, the center line is the line that connects the center of the ball with the center of the bat. It's that dotted line there, and the centerline angle is the angle that makes with the horizontal. For those of you who like trigonometry, the sine of the centerline angle is the offset divided by the sum of the radii of the ball and the bat. All right. Just so you know how to convert between the two, a 1-inch offset corresponds to about a 20-degree centerline angle. So that's the only number you need to keep in mind. All right, so these parameters here that you see are things that are totally under the control of the batter. He controls the bat speed, he controls the attack angle, he controls this offset. It's basically where he's aiming the bat. So how fast the bat is going, the direction it's going, and the location on the ball where the ball-bat interaction occurs. They're totally under the control of the batter, okay? Now, the idea is, the question is, how can we use those parameters, okay, that are totally under the control of the batter to predict what will be the parameters of the batted ball? Exit velocity, launch angle, spin, pick your favorite. Now, since this is a two-dimensional model, I'm not including spray angle in this. And in terms of spin, I'm only including backspin, topspin, not side spin. Okay. Now, I should point out, I've been working on this kind of problem for quite a number of years, and it's not so much this, see, the arrow points to the right here. I'm actually working, and this is a much, much harder problem, to be able to point the arrow to the left. That is, so we don't have often information about attack angle, centerline angle, offset, whatever. What we do have is information like exit velocity, launch angle, and spin. And I'm trying to reverse engineer the whole thing. How can we look at the batted ball parameters and infer what happened during that ball-bat collision? I'll say a little bit about that as we go along, but that is as yet an unsolved problem. Okay, so here are some examples. So these are high-speed videos from an experiment I did a few years ago. And we're shooting a ball out of a cannon at 120 miles an hour and no spin. And here's my simulated bat. It is a chunk of oak, ash, okay, that has the same diameter as a bat, and it's clamped in place. And here is what you would call a head-on collision. The ball hits right, basically the ball goes right along the so-called centerline angle. It is what we mean when we say squared up. So what happens is the ball bounces straight back, and if you could look at the little dot on the ball, you see that there's no spin on it, okay? Here the ball is hitting a little bit above the center of the bat, and so the ball bounces up with backspin. You can see the spin. Okay, so we're looking at this at a high-speed camera at 2,000 frames per second. And I should thank Art Chu over there, who used to work for Rawlings. I did this experiment with Rawlings. Okay, so I want to tell you about, very briefly now, 2 experiments that have been done. One I just told you, but I want to give you the results of those experiments to try to establish the parameters of the physics model that I use for the ball-bat collision. Okay, experiment number 1 was one that was also done at Rawlings, in which we swing a bat at a stationary ball, a ball on a tee, okay, and we measure the exit velocity, launch angle, spin, and all that stuff, okay? And so this is what the picture looks like, okay? The ball is initially at rest. Results from experiment 1. Some very useful, interesting results. So again, here is the picture of the geometry of the setup. So look at this plot right here. What I'm doing is plotting the angle between the attack angle and the centerline angle. So it's this angle right here between the dotted line and the red line. And here is the exit velocity. Notice that the exit velocity is largest when those angles coincide. It's exactly what you mean by being squared up, okay? The attack angle is going right through the centerline angle, okay? So it's the perfect match for optimizing the exit velocity of the ball. So that's point number 1, squared up. Point number 2 here is the spin rate. The spin rate is exactly the opposite. When it's, as you saw from that high-speed video, when things are perfectly squared up, the spin is essentially 0, and the spin increases linearly from there. So the spin, in general, not just for this experiment, but in general, depends on how both the attack angle, the angle that the bat is going, and the descent angle, the angle that the incoming ball is coming, in a real-life situation, how they line up with the center line. And when things are perfectly squared up, the spin is essentially 0. The third point, and I have a slide here about it. Oops, I guess I don't. Okay, the third point I don't have a slide on, but you're going to take my word for it, that the launch angle depends primarily on the centerline angle, or the offset, and only it depends also on the attack angle, but not as much as you might think. It depends primarily on the centerline angle. I'll show you some slides in a bit that'll convince you of that. Experiment number 2 is the one I just showed you. It's sort of the opposite experiment. Now we're shooting a ball at a stationary bat. And the interesting thing from this experiment was right here. All the things that we determined in experiment 1 were confirmed in experiment 2, so all the things on the previous couple of slides. But in addition, the following very interesting thing we learned was that the spin of the batted ball depends only very, very weakly on the spin of the pitch ball. And you're supposed to sort of see that from this. I won't bother trying to explain it, but it is a true statement. And there's nothing fundamental about why that's true. It's sort of an accident of nature. There's nothing deep about it, but it is a fact. Okay. All right, so now let's put it all together. So we have a model, and with that model, we can now calculate how exit velocity and launch angle depend on attack angle and centerline angle. And that's what you're seeing here. So here is a color contour plot, centerline angle on the horizontal axis, attack angle on the vertical axis. When the attack angle equals the centerline angle, that's what I call being squared up, and that's this dashed line right here. This is the squared up line. And you can see that the velocity contours, that's either the color or the blue lines, are largest when you're right along that line, exactly what the experiments tell us. So it's not an accident that that happened, it's because the model was constructed to make it happen. Okay, now, you expect when, this is the squared up where the red line coincides with the dashed line, that you expect low spin along here, you expect top spin when the attack angle is greater than the centerline angle. You could just sort of see the way that force is going, it'll give you top spin. And likewise, when you're the other side of this line, you're down here, you end up with backspin. So very low spin, backspin on this side, top spin on that side. Okay, so, the other thing I wanted to mention, before I go into this, the other thing I wanted to mention is these dashed black lines are contours of constant launch angle. So 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, okay? Now, remember I told you a couple of slides ago that the launch angle depends primarily on the centerline angle. If that were exactly true, these lines would be vertical, these dashed lines. They're not vertical, but they're almost vertical. You know, roughly 75% of the launch angle comes from the centerline angle, and only about 25% comes from the attack angle. But that actually, to me, that makes perfect physical sense, because the centerline angle is where the main force that the bat exerts on the ball is directed, okay? So, and that's basically where the ball's gonna go. If you were hitting a ball off a tee, that's exactly where the ball would go, okay? All right, so now let's talk about these different regions of this space here. You see, so here's roughly 25 to 35 degrees is along here, and if you want the largest exit velocity, you want to be along this dashed line. So if you want to hit a home run, you want to know where this dashed red line intersects 25 to 35 degrees, and it's about right here. And so if you want a lot of extra base hits, this is sort of where you want to live. You want to you want an attack angle of something like in the low 20s of degrees, and an offset, a centerline angle of maybe a little over 20 degrees, or it's an offset of about 1 inch. On the other hand, if your goal in life is to get a hard hit line drive for a single, you want to be around 15 degrees, and obviously you want to hit the ball hard, so you want to be on that red line. And that gives you a much different attack angle, something like 14 degrees. Don't take the numbers themselves too seriously, because they're highly dependent on details of the model. It's the overall message is these are very different hitting strategies, okay? These are very different hitting strategies. Okay, you could look at the same thing on a WOBA plot. So now I'm plotting WOBA, okay? That's the color contours versus attack angle, the center line. Again, here are the home runs here, and here's the high batting average here. And of course, bat speed matters a lot. Here is the WOBA plot I just showed you is this one. That was a 74 mile per hour bat speed. Okay, I just chose it because that gave me something like in the low 100s of bat speed, of exit velocity. Here, if you have a significantly lower bat speed, you see your good stuff has almost disappeared altogether. And if you have it more like 80 miles an hour, that region where you get extra base hits is spread considerably into that whole plane. But you knew this already. Bat speed counts for a lot. Okay, so now I want to ask the question, so the theory part of this is over, and I want to ask the question, how can we use this to learn about batters' tendencies? And I should point out, if you look at my abstract, you realize that I probably was much more ambitious than you will find out, okay? So this is really ongoing. So I've only sort of hit the tip of the iceberg on this, and this is very much ongoing work. But I do want to tell you the few things that I have learned by looking at StatCast data to see how this comports with, what can we learn about batters' tendencies based on StatCast data in the context of this model. Okay, I'm going to skip this slide. Okay, what I want to do is show you. What I want to mention to you, and this has been written about by various people, including myself, but other people over the last couple of years looking at StatCast data. The launch angle that a batter has that maximizes his exit velocity and also minimizes the spin is related to the attack angle. So remember, the maximum exit velocity is going to occur when you're along this dashed red line here. And if your swing plane, if your attack angle is 25 degrees, that intersects here, okay? So you're going to end up with your maximum exit velocity at about a 33 or so degree launch angle. And if your attack angle is lower, it's going to be, it's going to be lower. So there is basically a one-to-one correspondence between the launch angle at which the exit velocity is maximum and the attack angle. So one idea then about learning about batters' tendencies is to look at how different batters, where their maximum exit velocity is, what launch angle has their maximum exit velocity. So that's what I'm going to look at next. So I'm comparing Paul Goldschmidt with Mark Trumbo. So Mark Trumbo had a WOBA, actually WOBA on contact, of 404, and Goldschmidt was considerably higher at 522. So this is exit velocity. This is 2018 data, exit velocity versus launch angle. These are all his batted balls, okay? And the red points are the upper 15% of exit velocities, okay? And the curve here is simply a normal distribution fit to those upper 15% points. And so from that normal distribution, you could find that Trumbo has a launch angle for maximum exit velocity of about 11 degrees, okay? Whereas Goldschmidt is more like 23 or so degrees. So their maximum exit velocities are very, very similar. But Trumbo is, I guess it says here 12 degrees, and this is more like 24 degrees. So on this plot here, these two guys fall into different spots. Trumbo is down here, and Goldschmidt is up here. And it's no wonder that Goldschmidt has a higher WOBA because he is, further up this line, closer to the real sweet spot for WOBA compared with Trumbo. Another comparison. Joey Gallo and Giancarlo Stanton is notorious for having where his exit velocity peaks at a really, really small launch angle, like 5 degrees, okay? Now, there might be reasons why he wants to do that, which I'll get to in a second, but it does cut into his home run production, despite the fact that he's hitting the ball pretty hard. But these two guys are both hitting the ball hard. Their peak exit velocity is, like 116-ish miles per hour, which is pretty high, okay? But Stanton is at 5 degrees, Gallo is at 22 degrees, and you see, as a result of that, they have different home run probabilities. Stanton has 9.5% home runs per batted ball, and Gallo 13.6%, okay? And again, you could easily account for that just from data such as these within the context of this model. So Gallo seems to have a swing that is well optimized for home runs. Stanton, I would say, is not as well optimized for home runs. If he were to increase his attack angle a bit, he could get considerably more home runs. He's already hitting a lot of home runs, but he would get a lot more. Okay, now, there are a couple of caveats to all of this, okay? One caveat has to do with timing, the other caveat has to do with spin, and that's what I want to talk about next. Okay, so attack angle and timing. So what I've shown you is a ball that's coming from right to left. It's descending along the blue line, and the bat is perfectly well matched up to that. And this is what I typically would call a level swing. This is a thing that Ted Williams talked about in his book, The Science of Hitting, where the attack angle exactly is matched with the descent angle of the ball coming in. And, for a fastball, that might be 6 or 7 degrees. For a curveball, it might be 10 or 12 degrees, something like that, okay? So here the collision is on time. Here it's late. Here it's early. But the collision is exactly the same because those planes are perfectly well matched up. On the other hand, if you had an uppercut swing, if your attack angle is greater than the descent angle of the ball, this is what you're trying to do in here. Here they're perfectly, you see, the swing plane is perfectly matched up with the centerline angle, but if you're too late, okay, you're over here and you're way under, and if you're too early, you're way over. So here you're gonna hit a weak grounder, here you're gonna hit a pop-up, okay? So timing is an important consideration. Now, we've talked about, we were talking about that just in Vince's talk just a while ago, just before mine, and yesterday with Carlos's talk about timing, okay? It's actually very, very useful to put some numbers into this, because when I first did this, I found the numbers were rather shocking. So consider Joey Gallo. His attack angle, based on this analysis that I just showed you, is about 19 degrees. If the pitch is coming at 6 degrees, that's a 13-degree difference, okay? And his bat speed is of order 80 miles an hour. If he mistimes his swing by plus or minus 0.03 of a second, which corresponds to, in space, 4 inches, okay, this being 4 inches, that, either ahead or behind, the centerline angle changes by plus or minus 20 degrees, or the offset by plus or minus 1 inch. And that's huge, absolutely huge. So instead of being at the center here, he's, depending on whether he's early or late, he could be anywhere along here. So again, that's an important consideration when a batter is trying to figure out how to optimize a swing. And maybe Stanton really knows what he's doing when keeping his attack angle fairly low. He may not hit as many home runs, but he surely is not going to miss-hit too many balls when he does that. Okay, and the next thing I want to ask is whether the batter should adjust the swing to maximize backspin. I've had people tell me time and again that their coaches tell them that they should swing down on the ball to get backspin on the ball. And, okay, Ted would say, don't do that, all right? I would say, don't do that. However, it is an important question. Remember, along this red line where exit velocity is maximized, spin is minimized, and spin does help. Backspin on the ball will keep the ball in the air longer. It'll travel farther. So some backspin helps. We'll see in a second exactly how much it helps. So what I've done is, here is a 28-degree contour, okay? And what I'm doing is plotting exit velocity in red versus attack angle for a specific launch angle of 28 degrees. And you can see it peaks right here, okay? When the attack angle equals about 24 degrees. But look at the spin. The spin is, at that launch angle, the spin is not minimized because the incoming ball matters also, not the spin of the ball, but the direction of the ball matters too. It's about 1,500 RPM, okay? One could imagine altering the swing plane and the offset slightly in order to get, but keeping the launch angle the same, in order to reduce slightly the exit velocity, but increase significantly the backspin in order to achieve a longer distance. The important thing to remember is that when the exit velocity is at a maximum, the slope of that curve is essentially zero. So you don't really suffer a whole lot of exit velocity by moving off this red line here a little bit. But you do gain a lot in spin because that's a linear, it increases linearly as you do that. So here are some, the answer is, yeah, maybe it's worth doing, but don't overdo it. And the reason why you shouldn't overdo it is the effect of spin on the distance of a fly ball is one of diminishing returns. So one of the things we've learned in the last few years is that when you increase the backspin, you get more lift. That's good if you're trying to get distance, but there's also more air drag on the ball. And those two effects tend to sort of cancel out, and you can sort of see that from this stuff here. And I won't bother to try to explain it further, but let me quickly go to my summary. So I've told you about a physics-based model for the ball-back collision that qualitatively accounts for observations that you see in StatCast data, in particular exit velocity, launch angle, maybe something about spin, but that has further to be investigated. Future developments, of course, we want to extend this to 3 dimensions. The model the predictive part of the model has already been extended to 3 dimensions, but investigating the reverse engineering part of it is really, really hard in 3 dimensions, okay? So that's an unsolved problem. In fact, anecdotally, I call this problem the Sig problem. Sig being Sig Maydal, who originally posed this problem to be back when he was with the Cardinals. And so from time to time, I've worked on it over the years. I work on it for a month or so, I put it aside, then 9 months later, I pick it up again, and okay, so I'm in the mode where I'm still working on it in any case. In any case, further clarifying the role of spin is important. Nevertheless, even as developed so far, I think there's a potentially useful tool for analyzing batters' tendencies. That's it. Thank you.